Hello everyone, welcome once again to another Bible study and episode review in Shady Oak Ministries. I'm of course Shady Oak, and today we're going over episode 3 of season 6 of the TV show My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. The episode, The Gift of Maud Pie. Now, I don't know if Hasbro is doing this on purpose, but they're certainly making my job easier for me, because this is actually title copied and paste from an actual biblical story. Now note, there's as well an inspired short story by a man by the name of O. Henry, who named it after the gifts of the Magi, but the biblical origins remain undeniable and the same. And I'd like to discuss those with you, as well as how they paralleled and provide better illustration and light to those of you who probably aren't familiar with these things in today's episode. So if you can turn with me to Matthew chapter 2. This is the first gospel, and this includes the first inclination and story of what we would know as the Christmas story, but not specifically focusing on Jesus, but in the 3 gifts from the wise men that was given to him. You've probably seen this in the nativity scenes. We'll be discussing that today. Matthew 2, and we'll start at verse 1 and go all the way to verse 12. If you want to follow along in a physical copy, just go to the New Testament. It's right there. 2nd chapter, right at the start. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. Now note that term, wise men, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and have gathered all the chief priests and the scribes of the people together. Sounds like more than 3. And he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. And so they said to him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet. This is quoting Micah chapter 5 and verses 1 through 2. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not in the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he said to them, To Bethlehem. And he sent them to Bethlehem, and said, Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also. Just a side note on history, Herod the Great, the individual speaking here, was notoriously known for not only his short stature, his great buildings, possibly compensating for something, but also his murderous paranoia. He is the one who ordered the massacre of the innocent babies to ages 3 and under, assuming that was the time when the wise men had not returned with this message to Herod. We'll discuss that in verse 12. But this guy, he's trying to pull a fast one so that no one tries to steal his crown and authority. A king's being crowned and you're not talking to him? I mean, this guy was paranoid, modestly speaking. But he tells them, Go search carefully for the young child, and when you find him, come, let me know where he is, and I'll worship him too, curling his little Gustav mustache. Then when they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, and it came and stood over where the young child was. So a few years had passed, and this star was moving. This doesn't sound like a natural phenomenon. So when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. Now, once again repeating the point that the basis for this episode that we are going to be discussing today and its biblical origins was based off of the short story by O. Henry that was known as the gift of the Magi. And this story, summarizing it for you, given the Cliff Notes version here, it was a story where a husband and a wife wanted to, in a sense, bless one another on Christmas Day. And in doing so, they, an ironic twist, of course, sacrificed the things that meant the most to them to bless the person that meant the most to them. It was the wife's long hair that was so beautiful and something that she tended to every day. So her husband gave up his harmonica, his favorite musical instrument, and all that they could afford so that he could buy her a hairbrush. And the wife, wanting to bless her husband and his talent with the harmonica, bought him a pouch not for a rock, but for a harmonica, by selling her hair. So interchanged useless gifts, but the irony being that what it may be, just like with the trading, we see the party cannon for the rock pouch and Maud getting confetti for the party cannon. You understand the parallels is clear enough, but there are 5 questions I'd actually like to bring up to you regarding the biblical themes of this story, both in the episode and in the short story. And if I can still have your attention, I'd like to ask them to you. The first question is this. If that were the gifts and that was the short story, then what was the origin of this title called? Who were the Magi? What does that word mean? Well, Magi is a Middle Eastern term that usually is referring to an astrologer, a diviner, someone who speaks as an oracle of sorts. Or it could simply be referring to someone who advises royalty in these said capacities and giving him his horoscopes and that kind of deal. And specifically in this case, it was more than likely the Zoroastrians, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, of the Persian Empire or the astrologers of the Babylonian Empire. In either case, they were all the way journeying from Iran and crossing the Middle Eastern Peninsula just to follow a star has no shortage of significance. And with these guys going back in their historical antiquities as far as the 6th century, these guys were also very well known and well off. And also, just a side note as well, there weren't 3 wise men. Sorry to destroy your illusions and images of the nativity scenes from your childhoods, but there were 3 gifts. There were likely a great company of wise men, all of these scholars and scientists and astrologers, and as well, if they're going to be carrying treasures like this, they'd probably have military escort as well. But it really begs the second question, which, again, what were their 3 gifts? We'll talk about this in a second. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh, the 3 gifts from the wise men, the multitude of them. But the second question actually comes up. How did these Babylonians, these Iranian individuals, these wealthy people, come to know about the Jewish Messiah, let alone why would they even care to even go as far as to quote prophecies like Micah chapter 5? How would they get a hold of these things if they were on the clear other side of the continent, so to speak? Middle East isn't a continent, but you understand the point. Well, going back to the 6th century, when we first hear about these Zoroastrians, these astrologers in Babylonian culture, we run into a man by the name of Daniel, who actually was one of these magi. And he would be a very significant magi to these individuals because in Daniel's chapter 1, chapters 1 through 6, we actually read about his life story and the influence of which he was in Iran, in Babylon, in the kingdoms of Nebuchadnezzar, his son, his grandson Belshazzar, the first Persian king, Cyrus, retaining that also to Darius, and eventually going on to Artaxerxes, where he then passed away, but his legacy still continued. And as well, the influence of the Jewish people who were taken into captivity, him being one of them, being raised as basically from a teenager state to speak Babylonian, to know Babylonian culture, to eat Babylonian food, to walk and talk as one of the most promising individuals of a nation that would be risen up as one of the king's advisors and one of these magi, these astrologers. But all of these things being pointed out as Daniel in these chapters, in these passages of the Bible, and as well as in history, we know that he became one of the most well-known, well-respected, and also well-off representatives that Babylon ever knew. And it was for one reason, because of his God. And just like Daniel was a classic and almost an exemplary follower of the Jewish faith and actually setting an example for us in what someone who dedicates their life to prayer can actually accomplish, it really begs the next question is, what did Daniel do that so impacted the lives of these magi to not only continue on for centuries into the future, but to make them want to go so far out of their way as to cross an entire continent, to go all the way across the Middle East just to hear about this Messiah? Well, simply put, it's because Daniel told everyone he knew about Jesus. Old Testament style, granted, but still that being the case. Him not only sharing the Old Testament prophecies that were available to him at this time, including Isaiah and Micah and the other ones that you would reference and quote as being messianic, even Jeremiah was completed during the time in which Babylon took Israel into captivity, and Jeremiah being the one that was left behind as one of the people who wasn't really putting up much of a fight. And again, when we go through Jeremiah, it's a sad story, but remains historically confirmable as no less significant that he knew something that everyone else was refusing to believe. With that going beyond the point, Daniel, sharing Jesus, Old Testament style, had brought these prophecies up among his fellow magi, and being the most respected, revered, and recognized of all of them. You could imagine that these manuscripts were taken seriously, and even more so to the point that they would be going so far out of their way to note these prophecies and predictions, like the one that we can read. I'll just give you an example. On top of the one we read in Micah, Daniel chapter 9 and verse 24 actually tells us what the Messiah would do, what he was there to accomplish, his mission, his motives, and his goals. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, speaking to Israel, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring an everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Now that word anointed, the anointed one, is Mashiach in Hebrew, and in Greek, Christ. So this prediction of the Messiah, he would have the motives to put away sin from all of mankind, once and for all. He would take away its power, sin and death, and especially he would fulfill God's prophecies and ultimately bring to pass the ultimate promise that God made to Adam and Eve all the way in the garden to restore mankind's relationship with God. Now, all of these things being pointed out to us once again, what does this have to do with gift giving? I mean, it's significant that these magi, the gift of Modpai, the gift of magi, all of these things being based off of that, but yeah, good history lesson, but what does it have to do with the message that we saw in this series? I mean, we heard the My Little Pony themed music being played in the background and Modpai reciting that gift giving is about showing love for people, and what does this have to do with Jesus and being given these gifts? I mean, yeah, there's something there, but that's hardly a biblical parallel. Well, time out for a second, because what were those three gifts? Again, they were gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And these were all incredibly significant and showed that the Iranians actually paid more attention to the Jewish prophecies than the Jewish rabbis were paying attention to them during this time. Gold was a gift that was fit for a king. It was the most valuable metal that you could possibly have. And noting the fact that Jesus and his family grew up poor, it's likely that when they traveled to Egypt, they lived off that gold for the time that they spent there. The second gift was frankincense, which was a gift that was specifically for the high priest, that the incense you would offer before the altar of God would include these types of materials. So an intercessor before us and God. But what was the third gift? Well, the third gift was the most important. It was myrrh. Myrrh is an embalming fluid, generally what you would give to someone when they wanted to bury a body. Not exactly what you'd expect to be given at a baby shower, but understand this was on purpose, because Jesus himself said in Mark 10 and verse 45 that the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and listen, to give his life a ransom for many. Now there's that term give. That gift giving would be the Messiah's life. Now the question that would result out of this, and the fourth question that we're going to be asking here today, is why would Jesus give his life for us? It's because he loves you, silly. In the book of John, chapter 10 and verse 17, Jesus said this when asked about his deified status. Therefore my Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it again. No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This command I have received from my Father. I have been given special permission to not only give my life, but afford to do so because I can then resurrect it once it has been given. Now consider this. In order to give us the ultimate gift, he not only gave us the greatest thing possible that was most precious to him, God the Father giving his only child. Those of you who are parents listening, could you imagine even considering the possibility of giving up your firstborn son, the one who was only in all of creation, the one worthy to be included in your kingdom if you were a king? And consider the fact that this was not only the thing that was most precious to him. Note, God didn't physically have intimacy with Mary and incarnate Jesus as his son. The son is referring to the father and son relationship. They're both equal with God, but in a triune state. Well, you can ask about that in the comments. We'll discuss more of that below. But the point that's being made here is this. It wasn't just the thing that was most precious to him, like we saw in the gifts of the Magi and in the gifts of Maud Pie, when Pinky gave away her party cannon to show her love for her big sister Maud. But what? It was also the thing we needed most. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. That all of us being in the state of death and being under that authority, that through Jesus we no longer have to experience nor fear that. I know we will physically die, but we won't stay that way, because Jesus led the example. He went first, in a sense, into that dark cave to show that through him is resurrection. And remind me again, God so loved the world that he gave. You give gifts to show love. Isn't that right, Maud Pie? And this leaves us to the last question I want to ask you here today. Why would he do that? Why would he give us a gift that would be so precious to him as the life of his own son, which technically was his own life as well? That when the Father turned his face away from his son and allowed hell itself to be put on his shoulders so that you'll never have to, why did he do that? Why would he give us such an incredible gift as the life of his own son? And it's simply this. It wasn't just the best possible gift, but it was the one that we needed most. Jesus gave his life for you. And understand, with that in mind, fully realizing the significance and implications of so great a gift as for a father to give you, a rebel, and someone deserving of separation from him forever, his only son to redeem you, the thing that was most precious to him, he gave up freely for you. Why? Because he loves you. How could I ever give him anything in return then? And that's exactly the point. You can't. That's what we saw in today's episode, that giving gifts isn't about giving something better in return, but it's about simply saying thank you and knowing that by that gift you know how much somebody loves you. If God has given you his only son, what more could he possibly do to say, I love you more than that? Thank you for your time listening to this study. I hope it's been a blessing to you. If you have questions about the topics of the Magi, the Babylonian culture, Daniel, or maybe even the crucifixion of Jesus himself, if you've had questions about that and how it applies to you in your life today. If you're not a Christian and perhaps you want to know how to receive this gift, let me know in the comments below. I'll be happy to tell you how to join God's family. If you want to encourage the ministry, you know where to go. But most importantly, if you know someone who perhaps has seen this episode but hasn't considered these themes, please share this study with anyone and everyone that you feel would be blessed by it. Thank you for your time in listening to this study. And once again, remember, Jesus loves you, and he's given you the gift of his own life to prove it.